He didn't understand why he got so upset. From the outside, nothing about the situation looked dramatic. There were no major conflicts, no life-changing events, no arguments that should have shaken someone deeply. Most of the time, it was about small things, an unanswered message that stayed silent for a few hours. A friend canceled plans at the last minute, a comment that sounded slightly critical, even if it probably wasn't meant that way. Situations most people would notice for a moment, and then forget a few minutes later. But for him, those moments felt completely different. The reaction came immediately. His chest tightened, his thoughts started racing, his body filled with tension. Anger appeared first, then shame, then anxiety. Sometimes all of it at once. It felt sudden, overwhelming, almost impossible to stop once it started. And then, just as quickly as the emotion arrived, confusion followed. Later, when everything calmed down, he could see the situation clearly. He would replay the moment in his mind and think the same thing every time. I know I'm overreacting. He could see it logically. He could even explain it to himself in detail. But in the moment, it didn't feel exaggerated at all. It felt completely real, completely justified, as if something serious had actually happened. That contradiction confused him more than anything else. Because if he understood the reaction was too strong, why couldn't he stop it while it was happening? Why did the emotion take control so quickly? Why did his body react before he even had time to think? What he didn't realize yet was something important. His reaction was not really about the present situation. The message, the comment, the canceled plan, those were only triggers. What he was reacting to was something much older, something that had happened many times before, something that, quietly and invisibly, still hadn't finished happening. Part 1. When emotions arrive too fast. Nicolas was 35. He was not someone who struggled to understand himself. In fact, most people described him as thoughtful and reflective. He paid attention to his emotions. He tried to understand his reactions. He often spent time analyzing situations and learning from them. Rationally, he was very capable. He could step back from a situation and see different perspectives. He could admit when he was wrong. He could recognize when someone else had a point. From the outside, he seemed emotionally intelligent. But internally, things often felt very different. Because when an emotional moment appeared, something strange happened. His reaction came before his thinking, before interpretation, before choice. The feeling arrived first. Sudden, powerful, immediate. It was almost as if his body had already decided how serious the situation was before his mind had the chance to evaluate it. His heart would start beating faster. His muscles would tighten. His thoughts would race to justify the feeling that had already taken control. Only later, sometimes hours later, would the rational part of his mind catch up. That was when he would look back and wonder what had just happened. He would ask himself questions like, why did that affect me so much? Why did I react like it was a crisis? Why couldn't I just pause and think first? At first, he believed the problem was simply emotional control. Maybe he was too sensitive. Maybe he needed stronger discipline over his reactions. Maybe he just needed to calm down faster. But the more he observed his own reactions, the more something else became clear. The problem was not a lack of control. The problem was a lack of time. There was no space between the event and the emotion. For many people, emotional reactions follow a small sequence. First, something happens. Then the brain interprets what it means. Only after that does the emotional reaction appear. Even though this process happens very quickly, there is still a tiny gap, a moment where the brain evaluates the situation. For Nicolas, that gap barely existed. The event happened, and the emotion arrived immediately. No delay, no interpretation, no distance, just a reaction. It felt like his nervous system was constantly on high alert, ready to respond before the situation had even been understood. And that created a strange experience, because intellectually, he often knew the situation was small, but emotionally, it felt large, important, urgent, almost threatening. That difference between logic and feeling created frustration. He didn't want to react this way. He didn't enjoy the intensity of those moments. In fact, they exhausted him. Each strong reaction left behind a trail of doubt and self-criticism. He would replay conversations in his mind. He would imagine how he should have responded differently. He would wish he had paused before reacting. But the next time something similar happened, the same pattern repeated. The reaction still arrived too fast, as if the system responsible for emotional responses had been trained to move quicker than the system responsible for understanding. And in a way, that was exactly what had happened. His emotional brain had learned something long ago, something that once made perfect sense, something that had helped him adapt to situations where waiting, analyzing, or hesitating did not feel safe. So instead of slowing down to evaluate every moment individually, his system had developed a different strategy. React first, understand later. Because somewhere in his past, reacting quickly had felt necessary, even if, in the present, it no longer was. Part 2. The gap that didn't exist. In emotional regulation, something very small usually happens before a reaction appears. Most people never notice it. It's a tiny internal pause. First, an event occurs, someone says something, a plan changes, a message arrives with a certain tone. Then the brain quietly asks a question. What does this mean? That interpretation step is incredibly fast. Often it happens in less than a second, but it still exists. And that small moment creates distance between the event and the reaction. That distance allows the brain to evaluate the situation. Is this serious? Is it intentional? Is it personal? Or is it simply a normal misunderstanding that will pass quickly? For Nicolas, that middle step was almost invisible. Events didn't feel like things that needed interpretation. They felt like conclusions. Final, immediate, certain. If someone answered his message in a colder tone than usual, the feeling appeared instantly. Something was wrong. If a friend canceled plans, the emotion appeared before any explanation. Something had changed. If someone sounded slightly critical, the reaction arrived immediately. He had done something wrong. There was no internal conversation, no questioning, no pause where different possibilities could be considered. Instead, the emotional reaction arrived already convinced. And once the feeling had taken that position, the rest of his thoughts rushed to support it. His mind would begin searching for evidence, past situations where something similar happened, moments where someone had actually been upset, memories where a small signal had turned into a real conflict. Within seconds, his brain built a story that made the reaction feel logical, but the story was often built on associations, not facts, because the brain doesn't only process the present moment, it constantly compares the present with the past. Every tone of voice, every facial expression, every moment of silence, all of it gets compared with previous experiences stored in memory. If the brain detects something that feels familiar, it reacts faster. Not necessarily more accurately, just faster. And that's exactly what was happening to Nicolas. His brain wasn't evaluating each moment individually. It was grouping situations together. A short message that felt distant, a delayed reply, a change in someone's voice. Even if the situation was new, his nervous system treated it as if it had already happened before. Because somewhere inside his memory, something similar had once carried emotional weight. So instead of asking, "What does this mean right now?" his system reacted as if the meaning was already known. That's why the emotional reaction felt so certain, so immediate, so convincing. even when the situation itself was small, because the reaction wasn't responding to one moment, it was responding to a pattern his brain had been quietly collecting for years, without him realizing it. Part 3. Why the nervous system generalizes. The human brain is built to recognize patterns. In fact, it depends on them. Without pattern recognition, life would feel slow and confusing. Every situation would have to be every sound, every face, every decision. But patterns allow the brain to move faster. If something happened before and caused pain, the system learns from it. It stores the experience, and the next time something similar appears, the reaction becomes quicker. This ability is extremely useful when real danger is involved. If a person once touched a hot surface and got burned, the brain quickly learns. The next time the hand approaches something that looks similar, the body reacts immediately. Pull away. Protect yourself. That reaction happens before conscious thinking. It's automatic, because speed can prevent harm. But the brain uses the same learning system for emotional experiences, not just physical danger. If a certain tone of voice once came before criticism, the brain remembers it. If silence once meant rejection, the brain remembers that too. If a certain type of situation repeatedly led to feeling misunderstood, the system stores that pattern. Over time, the nervous system becomes very good at detecting anything that resembles those moments. But there's an important detail. The brain doesn't search for exact repetition, it searches for similarity. And similarity can be very broad. Two situations can be completely different in reality, but still feel connected to the emotional brain. A message that sounds slightly distant, a pause in conversation, a facial expression that looks uncertain. None of these things automatically mean something negative, but if they resemble past situations that once carried emotional pain, the brain may react as if the same story is about to happen again. This process is called emotional generalization. The system expands its warning signals. Instead of reacting only to the original situation, it begins reacting to anything that reminds it of that experience. For Nicolas, this meant many small everyday moments carried hidden emotional echoes. Not because they were actually threatening, but because they felt familiar. And familiarity in the emotional brain does not mean logical similarity. It means resonance. Something about the moment touches an old memory, even if the connection is subtle, even if the conscious mind cannot explain it. That's why Nicolas often struggled to understand his reactions. When he tried to explain them logically, the situation didn't seem important enough. But emotionally, the intensity was real, because part of his nervous system was responding to something older, something stored long before the present conversation even began. And the most confusing part was that the reaction didn't feel like the past. It felt like the present, completely current, completely justified. As if the emotional brain was saying one simple thing: this matters, react now, even when the logical mind had not yet figured out why. Part 4. A history of being misunderstood. When Nicolas began looking back at his early experiences, something subtle started to appear. His childhood was not what most people would describe as traumatic. There were no major crises, no dramatic conflicts. His family cared about him. They tried to guide him. They wanted him to grow into someone responsible and emotionally balanced. But there was a pattern that repeated often in small, quiet ways. Nicolas frequently felt misunderstood, not ignored, not rejected, but corrected, especially when it came to his emotions. If he became upset about something that seemed small to adults, the response usually sounded similar. You're exaggerating. It's not that serious. You're taking it too personally. Calm down. The intention behind those words was not harmful. Most of the time, the adults around him were simply trying to help him regulate his reactions. They believed they were teaching him perspective, helping him see that certain situations did not deserve such strong emotions. But for a child, those moments can create a different experience. Because when a child feels something strongly and immediately hears that the reaction is too much, a confusing message appears. The emotion is real. The intensity is real. But the response from others suggests the feeling is wrong. So the child starts wondering something important. Can my emotions be trusted? Instead of learning how to explore the feeling, the child begins defending it, explaining it, justifying it, trying to prove that the reaction actually makes sense. Over time, emotional moments slowly turn into moments of argument, not arguments with anger, but arguments about reality. A child says, "This upset me." An adult says, "It shouldn't," and suddenly the feeling itself becomes something that needs to be defended. This doesn't happen once, it happens repeatedly. Small situations, small corrections, small dismissals that adults may forget quickly. But the child remembers the pattern, because the child learns that emotional expression might be questioned, that feelings might be minimized, that reactions might be corrected before they are understood. Eventually, the nervous system adapts. If feelings are often questioned, the system starts sending them faster, stronger, more clearly, almost like turning up the volume, not to create drama, but to make sure the signal is heard. Nicolas didn't consciously decide to react more strongly. His emotional system simply adjusted over time. It learned that when something hurt or felt wrong, the reaction had to be immediate, decisive, clear. Because if the emotion appeared too slowly or too quietly, it might be dismissed before it could be acknowledged. So the nervous system created a strategy. React first, react strongly, make the emotion undeniable. That strategy made sense when he was young. But the system never updated the rule later in life, even when the environment changed, even when the people around him were different, even when no one was trying to dismiss his feelings anymore. The emotional response still followed the same old instruction: be louder, be faster, be certain, because somewhere deep inside, the system still remembered what it once felt like to be misunderstood. Part 5. Why his reactions felt so urgent as an adult. As Nicolas grew older, many things in his life changed. He developed close friendships. He built meaningful relationships. He worked in environments where communication was thoughtful and respectful. The people around him were not trying to silence his emotions. In fact, many of them were open to listening, but the nervous system does not update automatically. It continues using strategies that once helped it survive emotional confusion, even when those strategies are no longer necessary. So when Nicolas encountered small moments of tension as an adult, his system reacted as if the old dynamic might repeat itself. A slightly critical tone, a misunderstanding in conversation, a situation where someone interpreted his reaction differently than he expected. None of these moments were dangerous, but his nervous system still treated them as emotionally urgent, because the old question was still present beneath the surface. Will my experience be recognized, or will it be dismissed again? This question existed quietly, often without words, but it influenced the intensity of his reactions. Each emotional moment carried a hidden pressure. The feeling needed to be clear, immediate, impossible to ignore, because long ago, the system had learned that hesitation could lead to being misunderstood. So the reaction appeared quickly, not because the situation was dramatic, but because the nervous system was trying to guarantee visibility, to make the emotion undeniable. In many ways, his reactions were not about creating conflict. They were about securing recognition, making sure the emotional experience existed in the shared space between him and the other person. But when that intensity appeared in ordinary adult situations, it sometimes confused people. They saw the strong reaction without seeing the deeper reason behind it. They responded to the intensity instead of the emotion itself. and that often left Nicolas feeling even more misunderstood, which ironically reinforced the same pattern the system had been trying to protect against. But the story did not stay stuck there forever, because eventually, something important happened. For the first time, Nicolas began slowing down one of those reactions while it was happening. Not afterward, not through analysis hours later, but directly in the moment where the feeling appeared. And that moment revealed something he had never clearly noticed before. Something subtle, but powerful. Part 6. The moment he could see, the delay. The turning point didn't come from a dramatic realization. It came from something much quieter. During one conversation, Nicolas described a recent situation that had triggered a strong reaction. A friend had sent a short message. The message itself was neutral, but the tone felt distant. Within seconds, Nicolas felt tension rising inside him. His mind began searching for explanations. Maybe the friend was upset. Maybe something had changed. Maybe the relationship was shifting. The emotional reaction arrived almost instantly. But instead of analyzing the situation hours later, something different happened. We slowed the moment down together, step by step. Instead of focusing on what the message meant, we focused on what Nicolas had felt in the exact moment the message appeared. What did your body notice first? What emotion appeared first? What thought came immediately after? As he described the moment more carefully, something unexpected became visible. The reaction had not been a single emotion. It had layers. The first feeling was a quick surge of tension. Then came a wave of worry. But underneath both of those reactions, something older appeared. A quiet sense of being misunderstood. A feeling that someone might already have decided something about him without asking. For the first time, Nicolas noticed that part of the emotional intensity did not belong entirely to the present moment. Part of it felt familiar. Not familiar because of the person in front of him. Familiar because the emotional tone resembled something he had experienced many times before. That realization created a small but important shift. Not a solution, not immediate control over his reactions, but something new appeared. A pause. A moment where he could observe the emotion instead of immediately acting through it. The emotion was still there, strong, real. But now it had context. Instead of feeling like a complete truth about the present situation, it started to feel like a signal carrying information from two different places. Part of it belonged to now, and part of it belonged to before. That difference mattered more than he expected, because once he could see that difference, something else became possible. He didn't need to fight the emotion. He only needed to understand where it was coming from. Part 7. Learning to let the present be the present. After that moment, the work was not about suppressing emotions. It was about identifying their layers. Each time a strong reaction appeared, Nicolas began asking a few simple questions. Not questions meant to judge the feeling. Questions meant to explore it. What is actually happening right now? What exactly did the other person say or do? Then another question. What does this remind me of? Sometimes the answer appeared quickly. A memory, a tone of voice, a familiar emotional atmosphere that resembled earlier experiences. Other times, the connection was harder to see, but the act of asking the question itself created space, because the nervous system began learning something new. Not every emotional signal meant immediate danger. Not every moment needed the same intensity of reaction. Slowly, Nicolas started noticing that many situations were not identical to the past experiences his brain had been referencing. People responded differently. Conversations unfolded differently. Misunderstandings could be clarified. Silence did not always mean rejection. A short message did not always mean distance. Each time he paused long enough to observe the situation clearly, the emotional system gathered new evidence. evidence that the present moment was not always repeating the past. This didn't eliminate emotions. Nicolas still felt things deeply. But the feelings became more precise, less overwhelming, less urgent. Instead of reacting to an entire pattern from the past, he began reacting to the specific moment in front of him. That small difference created a sense of stability he had never experienced before. The emotion was still real, but it was no longer amplified by years of accumulated memories. For the first time, his nervous system slowly began learning a new rule. Not every signal required immediate defense. Some moments only required curiosity. Closing, 2230 to 2400. Months later, Nicolas described the change simply. "I still feel things strongly," he said, "but they don't feel bigger than the moment anymore." That difference may sound small, but for him, it changed everything. Before, every emotional reaction carried the weight of many earlier experiences. A small misunderstanding could feel enormous. A short silence could feel threatening, not because those moments were truly dangerous, but because they echoed something older that had never fully settled. Once he began recognizing those echoes, something important happened. The past slowly stopped interrupting the present. His emotions didn't disappear. They simply became clearer, more connected to what was actually happening, less influenced by memories that no longer needed to control the moment. This is something many people experience without realizing it. Sometimes reactions feel stronger than the situation seems to deserve. Not because the person is overly emotional, but because the nervous system is responding to patterns it once learned very well. Patterns that helped navigate earlier relationships, earlier environments, earlier emotional rules. Healing is not about eliminating emotion. It's about allowing the past to finally rest where it belongs, so that when something happens today, the reaction belongs to today as well, not to a moment that happened years ago. And when that separation becomes possible, something very simple but powerful appears. Each moment can finally stand on its own.